Welcome back to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. There's nothing like that moment in a soccer match when you're holding your breath. You're watching as your team is fighting its way down the field. Your best striker winds up, takes that shot, and...
Goals, 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 goals.
Wow, what a vibe. We have been talking about it for a while, but the time has finally come. The Men's FIFA World Cup starts next week. And this is one of the tournament's official songs. It's called Goals by Lisa, Anita, and Rima. They always do one of these official songs. It's a whole thing. As a reminder, Seattle will host 6 World Cup matches this summer at the once and future Lumen Field. FIFA rules only allow approved brands to display their logos, so officially Seattle Stadium is where you're going to be able to watch Egypt, Belgium, and the U.S. men's national team, among many others, take the pitch. And we've previously discussed on the show the politics of the World Cup, how these giant events can impact a city, and other weighty FIFA-related topics. You can find all those conversations on our website or in the show notes of this podcast episode. But we haven't talked yet about the actual game, the sport, who's playing, who is expected to do well, and could our own U.S. team actually pull out a World Cup trophy this year? It's going to be a long shot, but we'll talk about that. Leander Charlakins is the author of The Long Game, U.S. Men's Soccer and its Savage 4-Decade Journey to the Top, or thereabouts. He's also written about soccer for The Guardian and The New Yorker. Leander, thanks very much for being here.
I'm so pleased to chat with you.
First, can you kind of give me a rundown of this tournament overall, how it's shaping up? I mean, it looks like we have some of the traditional favorites at the top of the rankings here, Spain and France expected to go far. Who are you expecting to be the teams to watch this year, and who is likely to take home the trophy as of now?
So when World Cups are not held in Europe or South America, they tend to be more unpredictable. That's historically what we've seen, is that European World Cups tend to be won by European teams. South American World Cups, South American teams tend to do better. And when they're in one of the other continents that exist in the world, they become a lot more unpredictable and they become a little bit chaotic. I think there's a lot of elements this time around that'll probably add to the chaos. And I'm not just talking about the off the field stuff and the various challenges there that we can certainly get into, but the fact that it's going to be really hot, the fact that there's going to be a ton of travel. I mean, the Qatar World Cup almost 4 years ago was moved because it was going to be too hot in Qatar to play good soccer during the summer. And honestly, it's not that much hotter. I mean, once you sort of get above 90 degrees, I'm not sure how much it matters if it's 90 or 100 degrees for a soccer player. So that's a factor. You know, how's the Norwegian team going to hold up in an American summer? This tournament is also bigger. The last time the World Cup was played, it was 32 teams. The last time it was played in the United States, it was 24 teams, and there were only 52 games. This time around, there's 104 games over 39 days. So this is going to be a slog, and this is going to be a battle of attrition. And with the extra teams, that also means that once you've made it through the group stage, you have to win 5 straight knockout games to win the World Cup. So that's a bit like the NCAA tournament, right? You're not always going to have the best teams are going to win out. There's going to be a huge amount of luck involved. So that makes it even harder than ever to kind of forecast who's in the best position. If I were a betting man, I'd probably still go with France because they have so much talent. They could put 3 teams on the field capable of winning the World Cup, and they've been to the last 2 World Cup finals. So they're hugely experienced in addition to being really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, too, about the 5 knockout round games you have to win. I mean, just so little room for error. Just moving over to look specifically at Seattle, and there are 4 confirmed matches here. One is Egypt versus Iran. The others are Bosnia and Herzegovina versus Qatar, Belgium versus Egypt, and U.S. versus Australia. Seattle's going to host some playoff games as well. But when it comes to those confirmed matches, do any of them stand out as interesting teams to watch, something that people should either be looking for last-minute tickets for or to make sure to, watch from home?
This might be because I'm a soccer sicko, but I can find something interesting in all of them. Bosnia-Herzegovina will only be at its second World Cup. You know, they've only been a national team since the late 90s. They have an American-born player on there, Esmir Bajraktarevic, who's actually from Appleton, Wisconsin, and who came up in Major League Soccer. They're interesting because they clawed their way through the European playoffs for the last place at the World Cup by beating Wales on a penalty kick shootout and then beating Italy in a penalty kick shootout, which actually meant that Italy, which is one of only three countries to have ever won the World Cup three times, will now miss its third World Cup in a row. So that was a huge, huge upset. Qatar kind of controversially got into the World Cup because the final playoffs in Asia, they got to play both of those knockout games on home soil rather than on neutral territory, which a lot of people had questions about. FIFA has a very close relationship with Qatar, but they haven't been able to really play this year because of the war in Iran, and the war in Palestine has basically prevented them from playing any friendly games. So they're going to come into this tournament largely untested, but for a few exhibition games late on. Australia, which will play the US, is an interesting team. They're sort of plucky. They're I would like to think on paper not as talented as the US. Famous last words, perhaps. They lost a friendly to the US in Denver in October. Belgium is always interesting, and possibly because that's the country where I grew up. They're an old team now. At the last World Cup, Kevin De Bruyne, who's one of their most famous players, upset a lot of people because he told The Guardian that there was no chance that they could win because they were too old, which isn't the sort of thing you're supposed to say out loud.
But Belgium really kind of had a glory era, and now what it sounds like is even their own players are thinking that might be over.
Yeah. So Belgium had the sort of poison chalice of being called a golden generation. And basically any team that's ever called that winds up falling short because you're not really a golden generation until you've won something that has a golden color to it. And so they have a really old team this time around. They still have some fun young players like Jeremy Doku, who plays for Manchester City, but they seem to be past it a little bit. Egypt, I find really compelling because they have Mohamed Salah, who's one of the great Premier League players of all time. He's considered the most famous Muslim in the world. So he has a huge following around the world. He's going to leave Liverpool this summer. So this World Cup is really kind of a showcase for him for whatever new team he's going to go to show that he still has it. And then Iran, well, what can we say? I mean, we're going to witness a World Cup where the host nation is bombing one of the participants, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. The US and Iran have actually played each other quite a few times at the World Cup through the years, and there is internal strife there as well because one of the team's star strikers, Sardar Azmoun, won't be on the team because he's been critical of the regime on social media. And you tend to see friction there. You saw it in Qatar as well, where in Iran's opening game, they refused to sing the national anthem because the national team represents the regime in a sense, but soccer is wildly popular in Iran, and a lot of players at a minimum are sympathizers with sort of the resistance movements and the various uprisings that they've had over the years. So they're caught in a really hard place where they're trying to figure out, on the one hand, they want to represent their country. On the other hand, they want to send some sort of signal that they support the women's protests or that they support these various popular uprisings. So there's always this internal tension on that team that bears watching.
Yeah, we had the incident recently where some players on Iran's women's team initially were going to defect in Australia, and some of them then recanted, and it's not clear what kind of pressure was on those families, but just an incredible pressure cooker on those players, certainly. And then, of course, the country itself is, in the midst of this conflict. Iran is going to be based in Mexico now, reportedly, where they used to have a home base plan for Arizona, but now that's been moved to Tijuana because, again, I think Iran was not happy with accommodations and the optics, likely, of being based in the U.S. Obviously that is look, all those matches are going to be interesting. Iran, its own kind of special case because of the geopolitical situation around it. Can we talk about the U.S. men's national team now? Because this is a big moment for them. They had an unusual qualifying situation coming into this tournament as one of the host nations. They didn't really need to qualify. And now there's just like a lot of questions about their prospects in this tournament. I mean, what can you tell us, Leander, about should we be optimistic as U.S. fans?
So it's very strange when you become the host country, you qualify automatically, which meant that in June 13, I want to say, of 2018, the US already knew that it was going to be qualified for the 2026 World Cup. And the way international soccer is structured, a lot of the competitive games that you get as a national team are World Cup qualifiers. And those are intense and those are challenging. And those are really important in sort of forging your team, developing your identity, figuring out your playing style and your tactics and all the rest. And so the US has had a few tournaments that they've played in over the summer, but by and large, they've not had that preparation. And that's a real challenge. And given that traditionally it's more straightforward to qualify from this part of the world, they might have actually been better off having to go through World Cup qualifying. That said, they're in a manageable group with Paraguay and Australia and Turkey. Turkey was the last team added through the European playoffs. I think that's a much tougher assignment than they probably would have liked, but all the same, they should be able to navigate that. And then they're in the knockout stages. The best two teams in each of the four-team groups advance. 8 of the 12 best third place teams advance, so they really should make it through that. And then from there, it's straight knockout all the way to the World Cup trophy. The last few World Cups, the US has made the round of 16, which is a solid performance. I mean, to be top 16 in a sport that 211 countries take seriously is certainly not nothing. And that's where we get to the top or thereabouts. But the US in the 11 World Cups that it has been to has only won a single knockout stage game, right? And that was against Mexico in 2002 when they reached the quarterfinals, which is the modern high water mark for this team. The very first World Cup in 1930, they placed third, but only 13 teams had deigned to show up to Uruguay. So there's a little bit of an asterisk behind that. So if they're going to make the quarterfinals this time around, say, survive the round of 32, survive the round of 16, they'll have tripled the number of knockout games they've won in their entire history, right? So that's a really tall task. I mean, the U.S. is as talented as it's ever been. It's as pedigreed as it's ever been. Is it quite as spirited and organized and dogged as in the past? I'm not so sure. So I think if they reach the quarterfinals, that's a good performance. From there, it's basically a free hit. But I think what we also have to consider is the off the field stuff, right? The 1994 World Cup was seminal for the sport and in all kinds of ways moved it forward to really get that kind of momentum boost this time around. And I think American soccer could use it. You also want the country to care. If they reach the round of 32 and they get knocked out there, but the whole country catches soccer fever, that's arguably a better result than making the quarterfinals and the country doesn't care, right? So there's that aspect to it as well. So it's a little bit more nuanced than just how far do they make it.
That is so the uniquely United States burden in the World Cup, though, isn't it? Because this team, more than I think anyone else in the world, it seems to always carry this expectation that, like, this time they will prove that, the U.S. is a soccer country, or they will make the United States truly fall in love with soccer the way that never has before. I mean, it just always seems like that's a really difficult challenge on top of all the stuff you have to do actually on the field, to be successful. Like, does any other team have that sort of heaped expectation on them?
Not to this extent, and I don't think relative to how good they actually are. There are some really terrific national teams that have never won the World Cup. The Netherlands, where I was born, have been to three men's World Cup finals and have won zero. Belgium has never won the World Cup. Portugal, Cristiano Ronaldo's team, has never won the World Cup, right? England, if they don't win it this summer, it'll be 70 years since they last won the thing. 60, forgive me, math is hard. And so, this is a really hard tournament to win. I get asked it all the time. When is the US going to win the World Cup? And I think there's a kind of American sporting exceptionalism at work here, where there's just an assumption that any sport the US takes seriously, we should be competitive at. But it's just not that easy in a game that the rest of the world has been taking seriously for much longer than we have. Because I mentioned the 1930 World Cup. The US was back at the World Cup in 34. They got hammered 7-1 by Italy in front of Mussolini in the first round. And the Italy players did their fascist salutes, and the U.S. got to go home. And then the U.S. was at the 1950 World Cup, where they beat England in what's still considered one of the great upsets of all time. But what we sort of neglect to mention is that win was wedged between pretty lopsided losses to Spain and to Chile. And then the U.S. doesn't return to the World Cup until 1990. And that period is something that I really got into in the book because it's fascinating to me. They once had an 11-year streak in the 1950s and 60s without winning a single game. They
Wow.
would show up to World Cup qualifiers without a coach. There was one cycle where they had two coaches and nobody could figure out who was in charge. They would show up to national team camps and there'd be no balls or there'd be no uniforms or players were like, nah, I don't need to play for the national team. It's not worth my while. They were getting $5 a day per DMs if they were getting paid at all. In 1974, there was a World Cup qualifier where they didn't have enough players and they had to pull a guy out of the stands just to make up the numbers. So the US finally makes it back in
No.
1990.
They pulled somebody out of the stands? Oh my God.
Yes, for a qualifier. So they get back in 1990, get, badly beaten in Italy, but by 1994, they're back in the World Cup and they actually make it to the knockout rounds. So, during those decades that American soccer was in the wilderness, the rest of the world was still developing and still getting better. And so the American men have had to make up ground much faster than everybody else because they had this big lag where the sport just wasn't visible, wasn't relevant at all, and that process is really kind of amazing and a bit of a sporting miracle. So that they're even in the conversation of can they go on a deep run at this World Cup is really remarkable.
Before we go, Mauricio Pochettino, Poach is what he's known as, the men's national team coach, is really quite a character. You wrote about him in the New Yorker. I mean, to the point where he has lemons on his desk because he believes that they keep negativity away. And he really believes in a lot of sort of what I would call woo-woo spirituality around the sport of soccer. I mean, this is going to be his first real test as the men's national team leader. Who knows if he's going to stick around? Apparently, he's been talking with AC Milan very recently, even though he kind of hemmed and hawed about that. Any final, points here for people to understand sort of the way that he's shaped this team and the vibe going into this World Cup?
He's a very lovely man. He has a great head of hair too. I'm super envious. He's one of the sport's most famous coaches. He's managed some of the biggest clubs in Europe. This is his first job as a national team coach, which is kind of a different game. And yes, he believes in something he calls universal energy, which is kind of this spiritualist thing where he can read players' auras and figure out who's going to play well with whom, allegedly. He's also kind of reintroduced a real belief in this team after it had a slump and a bit of a scandal with the previous coach after the last World Cup in Qatar over playing time and age-old feuds between leading families in American soccer. And it was all very tawdry and weird and gross.
Very reality TV, I will say.
Extremely.
The Gio Reyna playing time situation, yeah.
Yes, and so when Greg Berhalter was finally fired, Pochettino came in and he kind of hit the reset button and he brought a real personal sort of warmth, but also an intense competitiveness to the team. He's Argentinian. They're sort of known for being fierce soccer players. So he's really kind of brought a new edge to the national team, which I think is something that they needed and will probably benefit from at the World Cup.
Leander Charlakans, the author of The Long Game, U.S. Men's Soccer and Its Savage 4-Decade Journey to the Top or Thereabouts. The thereabouts is key there. And he's written for Sounder at Hearts magazine about the World Cup as well, which is all Seattle specific. Leander, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.